Greetings hobbyists, this is Artisans of Vol. In this video we're going to be using sub D to make a power armoured torso. So in the last video we made these power armoured legs and I went through a bit of detail about why we're not going to use sub D to create these. So if you haven't watched that, feel free to check that out. But for some areas of modelling we want to use sub D, and it's all about knowing what's appropriate for what different task. No modelling technique is better or worse than another, it's just situationally using the correct choice. So we're going to be creating the torso for this power armour, and while parts of this can be created using non-sub D, and I'll do that quickly in the background because it's just doing the same thing that we did on the legs, for this upper section where we need a more organic and rounded shape, sub D is going to be really important to make everything quicker and easier. So while this is going on, I thought I'd explain quickly what sub D is in case you're relatively new to Blender. To do that, I'm just actually going to select some faces, so there, and I'm going to crease the edges. Don't worry about that, we will talk about that process later, and we're going to add a sub D to this. Now at the moment, if I go into edge mode, what I've done is made it so that sub D is only going to work on this single edge here, so it's easier to work out what's going on. So I'm going to come to side view, and we're going to press Ctrl and 1, and that's going to add a sub D in. Now if I go into vertex mode, we can see where the original vertex was, and this gives quite a nice explanation of what's going on. So what sub D will do is for each level it will take where your original point was, so that was here, and it's going to add one level of subdivision, so that's there and there, onto this mesh. It's then going to drag those points inwards to create something that's relatively curved. Now this is easy to see because I've only done this on one edge, but if I come back to this point where nothing is creased and do it on everything, so Ctrl and 1, we can see that this has done it on all of the points. We can then do this again, so for example Ctrl 2, and that will add an additional level, so we now get more subdivisions, making it more smoothed. It's worth noting that this is done over in the modifier panel, so you can change this over here. It's just the Ctrl 1, 2 and 3 as a shortcut. The other thing that we want to know is that if you add in a edge loop here and then drag to a side, because you're adding in more loops, what you're doing, if I just come back to 1, is you're controlling how far across your subdivisions are occurring. So for example, we can see that breakdown here because of these controlling loops. So that's the basic idea of it. We can create a much more rounded shape which we have control over, and we can control how rounded and smooth this is going to look, making it much better for organic shapes. So that's what we want to do for this torso. So we're going to start with a cube, and we're going to move this up, so G and Z, and we're going to roughly shape this out to the right size, so somewhere around there. Then we're going to increase that on the x-axis, and I'm going to come and have a look at the top. And yeah, that's probably about right. We're going to scale this a bit more on the Z, and let's move that down to about here. Now this is going to look very wrong in a second, but we're going to use it as a starting point, and we're going to talk through everything we're doing. And we're going to gradually add points to this shape. So I'm going to press Control and let's say 3 to make this a little bit more smoother, but we'll go a bit smoother towards the end. Now you can actually do this with many less, so for example, just 2. And again, I'm pressing Control and that number on top of the keyboard to control that. You can also do this down here if you haven't clicked into that, or as I said, over in the modifier panel. But importantly, we're going to want some hard edges on these two sides. So what I'm going to do is go into face mode, and we're going to add in these hard edges. So what I'm going to do for that is add in a crease. So we'll shift select that one as well. And to do that, we just press Shift and E, and then drag, and that adds in this mean crease, so we can see that there. So these are going to be the arms, or the joints for the arms, which we want to be flat. Now we're also going to put in some loops so we can control the shape more, so I'm just going to Control R there and Control B to bevel that out, to effectively add a bevel. If you've got too many bevels, just scroll down to the point where you've only got 2, and I'm going to drag that out to there, and I'm going to come to this face, and I'm going to shrink it down. So I'm going to press S to shrink it into where I want it to be, approximately the size of the arm. Let's have a look at this from the side, and then we can just G and move that to approximately where that joint is going to be. So somewhere around there. And we can see how this has rounded this off, and if I up this, it's going to get very, very round. We're not going to do that straight away because it's more taxing on the computer. I'm also going to add in a mirror for this because it's going to make this much easier to do everything with. So I'm going to come to add modifier and I'm going to come to mirror. If you don't have this, I'll add a video in the description of how you can get this sort of old school version of this, which I prefer. Just type in mirror and then add that in there. And we want this on the X, we want this bisected so it's going the other way. So this is just going to do everything to both sides. So at this point, we're going to start working with the shape, and I'm going to need a bit more here. So we're going to need some more control. So I'm going to press Control and R and add an edge loop there, which is going to allow me to make some more control over this top part. But you're not going to notice that's going to square everything off. So I'm going to go into vertex mode, select those, and G and Z those down to again round that off. And these are probably a little bit too long. So let's G and then Z those up. So we're getting something that's starting to look about the right shape. We can also then control this point here where it appears to be coming into the armor. We don't want that. So I'm going to G and then X that out to maybe somewhere around there. In fact, we might want to do that for all of these. So let's G and X those out a little bit. And then we can select all of these. Can use Alt and Shift to select the edge loop and then G and X those back in a little bit. So somewhere around there. Now we're going to want to add some more control in again here, so edge loop there, and then we're going to want to bring these out slightly. So let's have a look at this from above. So let's grab those and then G and then Y that out a little bit further forward. Not sure why that's unaligned there, so let's just select all of these and then S, X and 0 to bring those back to approximately the center, and then we can just G and X and bring those to the center there or go further. So about there is fine. So let's bring these forward. So G and then Y a little bit more, though that's going to make him look a little bit puffy. We could instead put an edge loop in the middle there, and that's going to flatten up the front. So I'm just going to select those, G and then Z, so that's more towards the top, and then we've got this control across the bottom. So all you want to do is get a minimum number of control points so that you can affect the sides where you want them to be. Now, one thing I will mention here is that you can, if I come down to the subdivision surface modifier, you can click this button and it puts the vertices onto the faces. Some people prefer this because they feel it looks or gives a better representation of where everything is, so it makes it feel easier to move around. So that's entirely up to you if you want to do that. I would say if you do, always come back to this every so often and see where the vertices actually are, because sometimes you get some really weird results with parts going in just very, very strange places. So just bear in mind, if you're going to use this, just be a little bit wary of it. What we're going to do now is cut out the bottom of this shape because I don't want this being rounded. Now we could do this with additional supporting loops. So if I just go into edge mode, we could press Control and R there and bring in something like that, which will give us a supporting loop and another one there. So we can make a more consistent loop. In fact, I would actually here come into face mode and select those faces there and press I to do it that way, which would probably be a bit better. And then we can start moving this around. But you'll notice it starts to create this slight pinching of these textures. Again, if we up this, it's going to get very smooth, but you're going to get a lot of additional vertices. And for me and my purpose, that just isn't necessary. And I'd strongly recommend against that. Now, there are points where that's really, really important to do and really worth doing, but in this, I wouldn't. I would just Boolean this out. So we're going to Shift A, Mesh, and bring in a cylinder. 256 vertices should be fine. Let's R and X, 90, G and Z that up. And we're going to actually create the shape that we want to cut out of this, which is going to be sort of an arced bottom using this cutter. So let's S and Y to scale that out on the Y-axis. S and Shift and Y so that we scale it in every direction other than that. So we're going to go to about there, and then S and then Z to create, let's go with that. And G and Z that up to about there. Click, Control and minus, and then we've got, if I hide this much nicer hard edge. And again, if I come to this and up that subdivision, you're going to see that this gives a really nice end effect without you getting this pinching from those edge loops. Now once again, and I did mention this in the last video, this is going to result in some shapes, if I come back to this, that are not quads. I'm doing this for 3D printing, not for any animation or design, therefore I just don't care about quads, and I'm not going to make my life harder trying to get quads in place, and I'm definitely not going to slow down my computer trying to deal with all that additional topology. So at this point I can still go into vertex mode and we can start moving things around. So I think I want this to be slightly further out, so we're going to bring it forward a little bit, and in fact that one could come forward a bit as well. In fact, maybe there. I actually think if we x-ray those can come down because this is where his head's going to be, so we don't want that really up to his chin. I might even bring those down as well. So you can see how quick it is to get this nice shape. We have, just because I've been moving things around, caused ourselves some issues there, so I'm going to just select all those, S, X and 0 to flatten that out. And like I said, you can see this is actually a relatively quick and nice process. It just does generate quite a lot of topology. That's not a problem here, that's going to be really useful to us, but for somewhere like the legs, this just wasn't needed. We're not curving this in multiple directions. At this point it's important to go and have a look around the entirety of the model. One thing that you need to realize about sub D is affecting one space can affect one of the others because of how the edges flex, and then you just need to tweak as you want. And considering how quickly you've made this overall shape compared to doing it without sub D, it's really not a particularly long process just to make these little tweaks to get it exactly how you want. Now I also want to make this space for his neck, so let's come into side view. I'm going to again bring in a cylinder and then G and Z that up. Let's scale that up to approximately the right size, somewhere about there. And then I'm going to G and then Z that down. And then let's have a look side on or front on. Maybe expand that out a bit there. And actually, no, that does need expanding out there as well. So this will be pretty close to perfectly round. There we go. And then click, click, Control and minus using ball tool. And we've got that space cut out. Now this is going to look a little bit silly here, just having this perfectly flat angle. So what I'm actually going to do is bring back this cutter, either using hard ops if you've got hard ops, so Q, ever scroll, and then I can click. Or if you don't have hard ops, you can always come to have a look at your booleans and see that this is using cylinder 4. So I can scroll down to my cutters and find cylinder 4. And all I'm going to do is add in an additional cut to this. So I'm actually going to use an additional boolean. And what I'm going to do is cut the actual cutter itself. This is a really nice trick to save you having to play around with your cutters too much. So I'm going to bring in a cube, scale that up to the point where it's bigger than the cutter is, G and Z that up, and then I'm going to align this. If I just go into X-ray mode, so I'm going to press R to rotate it and align it to somewhere where I think it will cut this in an appropriate way. So probably about there, and then click on that and Control and minus, and now that is cut out. If we have a look at this bottom part of it. So we're now going to get that shape. And what I'll do is just G and Z that down slightly, H and H to hide that, and you can see we've now got this angled cut where the head is going to go. Now I'm going to mention an add-on here, and this is something that you're not required to do, but I do want to mention this sharp edge, and if we wanted to bevel this in some way. Now, this is going to be one of the more expensive add-ons. If you're just starting out with Blender, I would not recommend purchasing this as one of your first, but it is really helpful for certain things we're going to want. Now I'm going to come back to this point, in fact I've just saved it, but what I'm going to do is apply all here so we can access the geometry. In reality, we'd be doing this at the end, but this seems like a sensible place to do it. And I'm just going to click and then Alt-click there to select that whole edge. That used Mesh Machine, which is the add-on we're going to discuss. And then I'm going to press Y and do something called an offset cut. Now, what offset cut allows us to do is effectively create this shape that's going to eat up all of the geometry around it. And this makes a much cleaner shape. And we can up the factor if we need to. But what importantly that's going to do is make this clean edge where we can then press Control and B and I can bevel this if I want to. So for example, I could go to somewhere like that and create this bevel there. Or in fact, I actually think that this could be smaller. So let's just shrink that down a little bit to there. and then Control and B, and then offset cut to there. So if you do want this more rounded lower edge on these sides, that would be the way that I'd do it. Now again, this is an expensive add-on. I think it's in the region of about $40. It does a hell of a lot more than just that. I'll put a playlist link in the description so you can see exactly what this does. But it is very useful for manipulating Booleans, which is what this was, but also other bevels. And compared to putting in the controlling loops that we were going to do, this is actually made a lot less geometry because it's only affected this small area instead of affecting larger portions of the torso. So it's up to you what you want to do. As I said, I would not be doing this. In fact, I won't apply any of these modifiers until right at the end, because that's one of the wonderful things about Blender. We can model in a non-destructive way and only confirm things at the end. So at this point I want to make an armoured collar, something to protect the back of his neck from blows that might strike him from behind, and to do that we're going to want to mimic this shape, so we might as well use the cutter that we've got. So again, come down to your cutter, select that, and what we're going to do is copy this top face. A couple of ways of doing that. The first is that if you've got hard ops, you just press Q and then control click on curve extract. So now we've got this there and it automatically turns it into something that we can see. The other option, if you don't have hard ops, there's a link in the description for hard ops, also hard ops and box cutter combined together as a bundle, which is really worth having. Go to face mode, select this face, Shift and D to duplicate it, then you're going to need to press escape, then you press P, then you separate by selection, but it's still invisible here, which is really annoying. So we're going to come down to our object properties, scroll all the way down to where it says viewport displays, change from display as wire to textured, and then we've got this. So hard ops saves some time if you're doing this. Let's H to hide that original cutter, and then we've got this here, and what we want to do is get rid of firstly this Boolean that we don't want, and then we're going to start manipulating this. So what I want to do is just add some extra thickness to it. So what I'm going to do is go into face mode, select this face, E to extrude it, but then I'm going to press escape to cancel it, and I'm going to press S to scale that up, and we'll go to about there for now for thickness. Now there is a problem with this in that it's going to create a face that's also here. If I press G, you can see what it's done here. It's basically extruded all of this out. So what I want to do is just press delete and then face, and we've got just the bits that we want. And in fact, I can delete this face in the middle as well. So we've now got what's going to be our armored collar. Let's A, select all of them, and then E to extrude that up. And this is going to be our armored collar. That's G and then Z that down. So that's going to go here. Now this is going to have a little bit of this face fighting, which, I mean, it's not a huge problem, but it will just be a little bit annoying when we Boolean. So what I'm going to do is just press S to scale it and just scale it the tiniest bit in. And then suddenly we don't have that issue. And we've got our collar here. Let's go into face mode and G and Z that up. So it's really tall, somewhere around there. And we're going to cut out the bits that we don't want. Now how you decide to style this is up to you. We're going to do a similar thing with just cutting it with Booleans, and I'm just going to demonstrate another add-on called Box Cutter. You do not need to use this. We can do this in exactly the way that we've cut out all of our other objects by just bringing in cubes and cutting them out. But Box Cutter is just activated by pressing Alt and W, and then we've got a box. I'm going to press D, and this gives us our menu. We want a draw line so that we can orient this, and I'm just going to do something like that, just to keep the right angle. And then what we're going to do is add another cut, so I'm going to add in a Engon cutter, and then I can select to go somewhere maybe there. We'll go with there, and then I'm going to press B, which is going to bevel it so I can round this bottom part, click, and then drag through. Put that front on. Yeah, I think that should be okay. I think this front bit's a bit boring. So to make this a bit interesting, actually I'll do this without box cutter just for this time. I think it's going to be easier. So let's bring in a cylinder, 64 vertices. Let's G and Z that up so we're making sure it's perfectly center. And then let's R on the X by 90. Then we're going to do that more. Scale that down to somewhere there. Let's position that somewhere interesting. And then we'll just Boolean it out with ball tools. And then just a little bit of tweaking in position. Now, one thing I will say, there is obviously a problem with this mesh somewhere. Now the reason I can tell that is that when I brought in this Boolean, if I just bring it in here, I had it as exact and it showed that this wasn't cutting correctly. So we can see that this has gone hollow. Now this means that there's some sort of issue with this mesh. Now we can fix that by clicking fast. In this instance that will probably be okay, but this means that there's going to be some other issues here with this mesh that we're going to need to sort out when we come time to confirm this. Now, just for the sake of the tutorial, as I showed earlier when I did this and showed what to do there, I'm going to confirm this just to show how we're going to fix this at this point, though in reality we want to keep this non-destructive, so I'm going to save a copy of this. So what we'll do is apply all, and then we can go and have a look at this and find where the issue is. Now I would guess that the issue is actually here. It's looking a little funny, but let's just double check. So what we're going to do is use the 3D print toolbox to check this. If you don't have this, go to Edit, Preferences, and go to Add Ons, type in 3D-print, make sure that's activated, and then in your end panel you have this 3D print toolbox. I'm going to click Check All, and we've got some issues with some edges somewhere. Let's have a look where they are, and it's in fact this whole top edge is not liking it for some reason, possibly with the way that we extruded something out earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use machine tools to fix this. As mentioned in the last video, machine tools cost about $5. It's really worth getting. It's probably the add-on that I'd recommend as the first add-on anyone gets in Blender, but obviously it's up to you. You can fix this manually, but it just takes a lot more time. And you can just install it and then you get what's called machine tools. And you want to make sure that this clean mesh option there is turned on. Now what that's going to allow me to do is in vertex mode or any mode, hit 3, and it's going to have a look and see if it can fix some of these problems. And it has fixed nearly all of them. In fact, the only things we've got left are our zero faces and our thin faces, and we don't care about that. Now it doesn't always work that perfectly, but it's generally pretty good. So that just gives you an idea of how quick cleanup can be with certain add-ons. I'm just going to come back, as I said, to the point where we haven't confirmed any of those booleans, because I want to be able to modify this later. Finally, just to finish this and show the final thing for sub D, we're going to create the groin armor. So similar start, making a cube, and then bring that up to about the correct place. I'm going to scale that up, and then go into vertex mode and approximately size this out. Now similarly to the arm joints, we're going to shift and E to put an edge crease on this top section, so that when I control and 3, this is going to leave that as a sharp edge. But we're going to talk about one final thing. Now in this part I mentioned that we would use Mesh Machine afterwards to add in this thin bevel, because adding in supporting edge loops here or confining loops would just create too much geometry. Now there is another way to do this. I don't actually find it as clean, and sometimes it can create pinching, but here it's not going to be too much of an issue because that pinching is going to be contained at these joints here where it's not going to be visible. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a similar thing of creasing, so I'm going to shift an E, but instead of going all the way to 1, I can actually take this to a lesser amount. So instead of going all the way here, I can come to about, let's say 0.8, or we could have just typed in 0.8 here. We can always change this, and let's up the levels, and you can see that that's adding in a bevel on this edge. And importantly, that doesn't increase the geometry there because we're not adding in, say for example, an extra edge loop, which if we just apply all quickly and look at this, you can see how this creates this bunching up. So adding that supporting edge loop doesn't look very nice, whereas using this crease but not all the way to 1 is another way of doing this. We're still going to need to move things around, so let's just add in an extra edge loop there. Go into vertex mode, and then let's just G and Y that forward, and then G and Y those back. Just try and create a good curved shape that's going to match the shape of the rest of our model. And as before, this being a sub D makes it really easy to just move around. X-ray mode is also quite useful. As you can see here, we can see the outline of what this is going to actually appear like, so matching up shapes is going to be relatively easy to do. So that's using the edge crease and giving us a few more options there. So at this point, we're doing pretty well with our armor. You can see this is starting to take a really nice shape. And if we bring back that image, we can see that we're very much sticking to something in human proportions. In the next video, we're going to create the helmet for this power armor. And now that we've gone through all the basic techniques, we'll start speeding this up a little bit. So we're going to move into a bit more of an intermediate level in terms of the workflow. If you enjoyed this, please do hit the like button and subscribe. And if you want the next video ahead of time, it's already out on the Patreon, where for a few dollars a month you get these videos a week early, ad-free, and other additional features as well. Have a great day, guys.